everybody, welcome back to the channel. And before we get into everything, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you always know when you get my videos. And please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps the channel out a lot. It's much appreciated. And as always, this is also available on Spotfiy. So if you want to listen to this instead of watching it here on YouTube, you can click the link in the description below and listen to it wherever you go. Now, with that out the way, today I'm going to be reviewing Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. It is the sequel to Into the Spiderverse, the Oscar-winning movie from 2018. Now, this movie has multiple directors, but the creative force behind it is Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. They were the producers. And it has a star-studded voice cast, starting with Shameik Moore, Hailee Steinfeld, Oscar Isaac, Issa Rae, Brian Tyler Henry, Jason Schwartzman, and so many others. Now, let's get into everything. Now, the first thing I want to talk about with Across the Spider-Verse is two things. Now, number one, just like the first one, this movie is absolutely gorgeous. The art style and the animation on this is like nothing you have ever seen. From the different universes that all have a different style and coloring, to the motion in which characters move, this movie is one-on-one of paying attention to detail and showing and showering love into every single frame that a person will see about this movie. I can't talk enough about how gorgeous this movie was. So it just like the first one, and it seems like the first one couldn't be beat, and this one looks even more breathtaking with how many scenes are just eye-popping. It truly feels like a comic book come to life. So that's one thing that I first off the bat noticed, that this movie was beautiful. Now, number one, like I mentioned before, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller are really the driving forces and the creatives behind this, even though they have directors and whatnot who also did a great job. But those two really show their love of the Spider-Man character. And when I was thinking about this movie, if you look at the first one and this one, the first one is very much of Miles becoming Spider-Man. And this one now is Miles learning what it means to be Spider-Man and the sacrifices that come along with it. And I think that made this movie even more complex, even more in-depth. And it really felt like it was a much more mature sequel. Like the first one is very funny and it skews towards kids, but this one is dealing with much more serious topics and issues that we all know the Spider-Man character has to deal with. And you can feel that in the story, that it is much more mature as Miles gets older and goes deeper into what it means to be Spider-Man, as he literally meets a multiverse of Spider-Man and they all kind of go through the same thing. You see what needs to happen and what do you have a choice in stopping. So I also really appreciated that side of this movie, where it's like it felt like not to be cliche, but like a film per se. And it's 2.5 hours, but it did not feel that long at all. Like this flew by and everything. But those are two things I really noticed and I really love about this movie. Now, a few things that I also noticed that weren't so great is, even though the action scenes were animated beautifully and they showed off everybody's specific character traits and their powers and how they worked well with each other, it did feel at times where it kind of became chaotic, where it was, if you weren't fully paying attention, you could kind of get lost and not really know what's going on. But it's a small gripe I have with the movie. Everything else was amazing. And I like the kind of bait and switch, because they introduced Miguel O'Hara, who was actually my favorite Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2099. And they introduced him sort of in a way where you could feel like he is the villain and he is the antagonist, but you also understand where he's coming from. And I also appreciate that. And that leads back into my point about this is a much more complex adult film, because at the same time as like you are kind of mad at Miguel for how he's going about this at Miles, and you understand why Miles would be mad at his friends as you learn who know what's going on and didn't tell him, you can also understand why they did this and why they knew that Miguel or Miles per se would react the way he reacted. And I also like the bait and switch where they also have a villain per se in the beginning of the movie who you think is a throwaway villain who is like, oh, he's just gonna fight him for the 5 minutes, and they acknowledge this in the movie, but they turn around and they show how something like that can turn one small problem into an even bigger problem. So I really appreciate that, and the kind of meta-ness of how even the audience was like, oh yeah, he's a throwaway villain, and he eventually, the Spot, becomes the major villain of the franchise toward the end of the movie. Now, speaking of the end of the movie, this does end on a cliffhanger, but it still is a full movie where each character has an arc, especially Gwen, which they focus on a lot in this movie, and her acceptance of herself as Spider-Woman and what that means. And you get that full arc when the ending comes, and it leaves off on a major cliffhanger that is also going to continue Miles' arc, which is not being able to fit in just this one movie, which gets me really excited for Beyond the Spider-Verse. But anyway, and even with that, the ending can feel a little rushed, but I don't think it's too much because everyone has an arc and everyone has a satisfying story that finishes off in a neat way by the end of this cliffhanger. So like, I'm not too peeved about that. But yeah, so. And also after this movie also is chock filled with cameos. And it's not just cameos for cameo's sake. They have a purpose and they have a reason for being there. And I really like how it balanced both of like having a purpose, but also it is very much cameos. They're like, oh, there is my favorite Spider-Man, because it was multiple moments where I was in the theater. I pointed at the screen. I was like, oh my God, I recognize that from the Spectacular Spider-Man, the 2000 show, to the Spider-Man Unlimited, which is a personal guilty pleasure favorite of mine, Spider-Man, and also even the Spider-Man game. So it's chock full of cameos that everyone will have a favorite Spider-Man that they love and like, or even have personal Spider-Man that they like more. For me personally, Miguel, Spider-Man 2099, is always going to be my favorite, and he was even my favorite in this. But also, a surprising Spider-Man that I didn't think I would love was Hobie Brown. Once you see the movie, you will understand what I'm talking about. He is absolutely a scene stealer. He's voiced by Daniel Kaluuya, and he brings all the charm and charisma and intelligence to this character that it needed, and it could have fell flat with what his archetype was, but he rides that fence just enough where it is entertaining and it makes a lot of sense by the end of the movie. So overall, I thought Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was a beautifully animated and masterful sequel that upped the ante on the maturity and the depth and complexity of Miles Morales as Spider-Man and this universe in general, and I can't wait for the sequel. And I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. This movie was phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Now, have you seen Across the Spider-Verse? Have you seen Into the Spider-Verse? What do you think? Who is your favorite Spider-Man? Is this your favorite Spider-Man movie out of the whole entire franchise? Whatever it is, comment that below and let me know. And as always, I'll see you next time.